Welcome back to the Human Longevity Project. In episode 1, we covered a ton of information on the role mitochondria play in the aging process, which will be extremely helpful over the course of this series as we uncover the lifestyle factors that directly impact mitochondrial health. In the coming episodes, we'll discuss diet, exercise, toxins, and more. But before we do, we'll reveal the profound impact the gut microbiome has on mitochondrial health and the immune system. In episode 2, you'll learn why it's impossible to have optimal health without a healthy microbiome. And we'll take a closer look at all the ways the microbiome influences how we think, feel, and function on every level. Could our microbiome hold the key to mitochondrial health and ultimately longevity? We're about to find out. You might want to take a few notes for this one. There will be a lot of information you may have never heard before. We did our best to deliver this powerful new information as simply as we could, but if you get a little overwhelmed, just hit the rewind button a couple times and give it another listen. And if you have any questions, please leave them for us below. Enjoy episode 2.
We are in the era of the microbiome now, and we are really at its infancy, even though for functional medicine we've been doing this for 30 years. And effectively, we kind of didn't know all the reasons why everything was working, and now we're learning and growing about it. And it's just an extraordinary time.
The critical nature of the microbiome. If there's one organ that's most important, it's the microbiome.
We really are in the area of research where the microbiome is really hitting all fields. So the microbiome health is impacting cardiology, neurology, immunology, endocrinology, that they're finding your gut microbiome can impact all these different disease processes. Now, they're still trying to figure out how, but they do know that the more diverse your gut is, that the more protective effects you have through all these different diseases.
For me, our body is not belonging to us. I think our body is belonging to our microbiota. So the question is why we have this huge amount of bacteria, because they play more strategic role than before.
We have to really change the way we look at ourselves. When we look at our chromosomes, we've got 22,000 functional genes. Sounds like a lot, but you compare that to a rice plant or an earthworm that has double the amount of genes, we don't start to look that cool anymore, right? And so we're like, how do we conduct all the functions that we do on a daily basis with such limited number of genes? And as it turns out, the microbial genes within our body amount to about 3.3 million in total. So we've got 150 times more bacterial viral DNA in our body than human DNA. And it's looking like 99% of metabolic function, things that we do on a daily basis that make us human, are coded for by bacterial and viral DNA. So we can barely do anything for ourselves, right? And so we need the microbial DNA to conduct necessary function to live, to digest food, to breathe, even how our emotions and our view of the world are concentrated and how they're characterized are dependent on the types of microbes and microbial DNA we have in our system.
So I think of our microbiota kind of like our superheroes. Right at the gut lining, at that sterile zone, they hover right above the sterile zone of mucus, and then where we are absorbing food, they help us absorb food, digest food, break down food.
It has its own metabolites, it has its own way of generating energy, it has its own particular functions. There are things that we derive from it exclusively, for example, like vitamin B12 and K2, vitamin K, all of these things are coming from your microbiota.
And we now know that it's not just important to avoid digestive symptoms, but so many issues from autism to ADD to autoimmune disease to cancer to diabetes to obesity. All of it's really important. And so we're in a really fundamental shift in the paradigm, and the microbiome is sort of leading the way around that.
The microbiota, 78% of which are gut microbiota, is what we are focused on currently in terms of health. Now, the gut microbiota weigh about 2 kilos, or about 4 pounds. And they're considered a postnatal organ, meaning they grow after birth. So when a child passes through the vaginal canal in spontaneous vaginal delivery, what happens is that it gets inoculated with the maternal bacterial microorganisms. In the first year of life, it has an adult fingerprint, meaning it's as unique as you in terms of your identity as an individual. And then to age 2 to 3 years, there's an increasing bacterial diversity, but there's a decrease in inter-individual variability, meaning it's set for you. Because it's a forest down there, it's like an entire ecosystem that comprises the gut microbiota as an organ.
So there are two terms that are used interchangeably, microbiota and microbiome. And often they're confused. So microbiota is actually the microbes, the population of microbes, including viruses and bacteria and all that exists in any given part of the body. For example, the skin has a totally different microbiota. The gut and different parts of the gut have different microbiotas. The eyeball has a different microbiota. The placenta does. So those are the population of bacteria, viruses, and other organisms that exist. Microbiome is the totality of microbes and all their genetic elements. And that's where things change, because the genetic elements of the microbes really determine health and wellness in many ways. We now know that we really can't even start to think about longevity and how we're going to live, into our hundreds, for example, without disease, without being propped up by medication, without really addressing the ecology of our body, and all of the things that we're doing to destroy that ecology on a daily basis.
Learning how to actually take care of our inner garden and tend to our inner garden is probably one of the most important things we have to learn how to do. And that means diet. It means actually the right fiber and probiotics, and also even things like dealing with stress, because that changes the flora that grow in there. And it happens dynamically. Every bite of food you take, you change your flora. If you eat X in the morning and you check your flora, it's going to look one way. If you eat Y at night and check it, it's going to look a different way. And so how do we then begin to sort of use that knowledge to create health? So really, really important concept is you have to tend to your inner garden and learn what supports it and what harms it.
Microbiota may seem inconsequential, but research is showing us how important these organisms are. These microbiota consist of viruses, bacteria, yeasts, and other organisms that quite literally dictate our function. If we want longevity and vitality, we must improve the health of our microbiota. As this series progresses, you'll see how various lifestyle factors impact our gut microbiota and the myriad of ways we can improve the balance of our inner ecosystem.
So if these microorganisms are in balanced state, no problem. But if through our lifestyle and diet we do something that we change that environment, then that's not good.
It seems as if everybody has allergies. You see somebody sniffling or sneezing and they just say, oh, I've got allergies. And it just feels like that's a normal part of the fabric of our life. But allergies are new. In fact, allergies didn't really exist until the Industrial Revolution.
Autoimmune disease, for example, can be started by a simple course of antibiotics or another environmental trigger, being exposed to certain things like glyphosate or other weed killers and pesticides can start causing perturbations in the ecology, which will then amplify itself into this dysbiotic system called a disease.
Every year, we're spraying millions and millions and millions of pounds. Just look it up for yourself. Look up glyphosate use charts, and you'll see even from the 1990s, we are spraying an exponential amount more of glyphosate than we did last year. Now, how it influences the gut, parts per billion, ppb, parts per billion. I mean, you can't even comprehend how tiny that is, has been proven to kill beneficial bacteria in the gut.
The arrogance of science, if you will, that we can pick and choose what microbes are allowed to exist on the planet, and we're going to get rid of the ones we don't like and let the other ones stay around. Look at where it has led us, the widespread indiscriminate use of antibiotics.
Antibiotics kill pathogenic bacteria, but they also kill the good bacteria, the good gut microbiota as well. And it was actually around the 1980s, 1990s when we started to realize, oh my gosh, all of these broad-spectrum antibiotics, they have negative effects. The bacteria, the pathogenic bacteria, are adapting to them. And so then we started to realize, hey, we don't have any more antibiotics. There still, to date, aren't any new antibiotics coming out.
There's talk now about the end of antibiotics and the post-antibiotic era, what are we going to do?
Eso lo tomaban, también le daban un cocimiento de cáscara de limón agrio, limón ácido, lo cocinaban con algunas hojas, la tomaban para la gripe.
Quanto cose naturali, si facevano per esempio sciroppi, si facevano questo, si faceva quell'altro. C'era un tipo per esempio che curava per l'artrose, per esempio si faceva per esempio lo sciroppo e guariva.
You've got antibiotic resistant strains of C. diff that are occurring in healthcare facilities. It's killing 39,000 people a year. That's a statistic that's from the CDC. Antibiotics aren't working anymore. So you've got the combination of influences. You've got glyphosate, you've got antibiotics, you've got other pesticides and insecticides, you've got fungicides, you've got miticides.
Human beings aren't the only organisms on the planet that possess an internal intelligence that allows it to adapt to the environment. So do viruses, so do bacteria. And as a matter of fact, they're much simpler, smaller things. They can adapt much quicker than a human being can. So we speculated, just logically, that if you continue to kill off all these weak microbes with antibiotics, that what might happen is that then you have these bacteria, you kill off the weak ones, now the strong ones sort of share their information with each other and create super strong strains, which what are we seeing now? But these super strong antibiotic resistant bacteria, we created them. The scientific journals, the mainstream scientific journals are all acknowledging this right now and recognizing that we have a big problem.
And we're separating ourselves from the earth, separating ourselves from germs, when in fact, they're a crucial part of the gut. I mean, if you were to look into our gut, our culture would essentially want to cotton swab the daylights out of it because there's so many different crazy types of bacteria in there that if we saw those on a table, we'd want to clean them right off right away. When in fact, those are there to make us stronger.
Pues nosotros como los criamos a la orilla del mar, íbamos y ordeñábamos así como ellos, chiquitillos, ordeñaba uno, llevaba la leche a la casa y después en barro hasta aquí, se metía el agua, salía y lavaba, eso era todo.
Είχε μικρόβια εκείνα τα χρόνια. Αν πάει χτύπα στο πόδι σου, το χέρι σου, την ουραγία της σταματούσε από κοπριά το ζώο.
Από τις κατσίκας, αλλά να είναι ξερή η κοπριά. Κοπανίζαμε και βάλαμε απάνω. Τώρα έτσι πέσεις κάτω θα πάθεις τέτανο.
Τώρα,
και καπνό βάλανε απάνω στην πληγή ή από αυτή την κοπριά της κατσίκας για να σταματήσει το αίμα.
So I think one of the things that we're doing is once again, we're swabbing and cleaning and disinfecting everything in our culture. We are a sterile culture, and we're seeing the effects of it now. Autism is on the rise. Heart disease, half of our culture has heart disease. Brain disorders, anxiety, depression is through the roof because we're not allowing our microbiota, we're not allowing our microbiome to do its job, which is balance.
We look at our skin cells and we've got a lot of skin cells. All we see is skin, right? But we've got about 50 bacteria cells for every one skin cell that's on our dermal layer. So we are far more bacteria on our outer shell than we are human skin cells.
Recently, we have discovered that we have microbes deep inside the skin. It means we have just microbes in the dermis, inside the glands, and so on. And these are very relevant, this type of microbiota that we have called as core microbiota because there is a cross-talking between this type of microbiota and the immunological system inside the skin.
Did you catch that? What Dr. Drago said is pretty amazing. Through his team's research, they found that microbiota exists deep within the skin and the glands of the skin. And these microbes talk to the DNA and mitochondria in our cells to influence inflammation at the cellular level. His research suggests that it is through these mechanisms that conditions like eczema and psoriasis may originate when the deep skin microbiota populations are out of balance. Throughout this episode, you'll continue to see the importance of the communication between microbiota and our own human cells.
One of my big focuses is always, what are the things that we're doing in the modern world that our ancestors never did, which allowed them to evolve to give us this opportunity to exist in the world today. And some of the things that they really avoided and had actually no opportunity to do was to kill off microbes in a large scale on a daily basis, really for no good reason. And one of the things that people just don't realize, anytime we use antimicrobial products, what we're doing is selecting for more virulent and more pathogenic and more harmful organisms. Less than 2% of microbes ever discovered are harmful to humans. So that means 98+% is actually beneficial or benign. The best way to control that 2% is let the 98% flourish.
Our skin is the first barrier of the immune system. And a lot of people don't recognize that there's a lot of chemicals that absorb into the body, the bloodstream, from what we put on our skin.
The cosmetics have an increasing market year by year of 5-6% depending on the year. So we calculate that everyone uses a cosmetic every day in different sites of our body. Of course, cosmetics, there are some cosmetics, and especially the way of their usage that can deeply influence the skin microbiota by decreasing the diversity.
Some people might grab a shampoo and they're like, oh, it's just a shampoo, or I'm using some okay skincare products. So my makeup and my mascara and my eyeliner and lipstick and shampoo and nail polish and hair dye can all be toxic. And my baby toys and possibly my couch and my carpet and my paint on the walls. And you start thinking of, you don't think about all these other things. So I mean, from your personal care products to your clothing, to your surroundings, you're inhaling and you're absorbing so many chemicals.
Sodium benzoate, potassium sorbate, what is that? Phenoxyethanol, citric acid? I mean, these are preservatives that do nothing for us. Artificial fragrance, artificial colors, glycerin, alcohol, drying the skin out. I mean, these don't serve us. They don't serve our skin.
There's so many conventional products out there that is stripping your skin of its natural bacteria. Triclosan is a big one that was actually just recently banned. So it's a prime example of something being on the market for so long, and then finally, after so much stuff coming out about it, the negatives, they finally banned it.
So we have to look at all these things because now they're really all add up to contribute to something that may be going on in our microbiomes, and even our skin microbiome. As we shower, we have all this like sterilizing chlorinated water that can be affecting us. For some people, it won't be a big deal at all, but for others, it might be something that is going to make a big difference in their health, added on with everything else going on for them.
Bueno, de los medicamentos que recuerdo ahorita, está la gavilana, está el frailecillo, está la guanislama, ¿verdad? La gavilana es para depurar la sangre. El frailecillo es para las escoriaciones de la piel, cuando tenés alergias en la piel o algo así. Y así sucesivamente íbamos usando la medicina. La guanilama es buenísima para el estómago. Cuando sentís que algo te cayó mal, tomás guanilama con miel de abeja, es buenísimo. Y ahí yo tengo, como te digo, tengo un libro con bastante conocimiento que dejó mi papá y yo lo conservo y nos ha ayudado mucho.
Prendeva un colpo d'aria, allora o lacrimavano gli occhi, sentiva male la testa, eccetera. Si faceva questo servizio, si portava della legna, cioè ramoscelli di tre qualità, e questo si faceva al fuoco e poi questo lo coprivano con... Si bolliva. E si metteva così in modo che il fumo andasse alla faccia laddove... E così le passava questa piccola cosa che le veniva così. A fummento. In dialetto a fummento.
So every time we use an antimicrobial soap or hand sanitizer and we kill off these really good commensal bacteria within our skin, we're setting up the process of disease. And that turns into things like acne, atopic dermatitis, psoriasis, eczema. It can even turn into something as simple as just dry skin, which then breaks easier, and then you can get more microbes getting into the surface of the skin. The barrier function of the skin doesn't work anymore, and then we end up with MRSA infections and things that can be really serious. All of that just starts with simple perturbations of the ecology of our skin for no good reason. And that's a really dangerous thing, because the microbes on our skin play a critical role in the health of our skin, not only the health of our skin, but the communication between our skin, our gut, our brain, our immune system, and so on.
So there's intimate relationships between the brain and the gut. And we all know that chemicals and different things in the gut can impact the brain. So you've eaten something, it changed your mood, that's an inflammatory response. So there's peptides, there's cytokines, there's different postinoids, there's neurotransmitters that can all directly impact brain function by just going through the blood-brain barrier and impacting the brain. So that's a common known pathway, right? That's kind of the gut-brain response. But there's also a brain-gut response, and the brain, through pathways in the brainstem called the vagus, activate the gut.
For every message from the brain going down to the gut, there are 9 messages from the gut going back up to the brain. And those messages are coming from the microbiota, the bacteria in your gut.
Oftentimes people will call the gut the second brain. I think it's debatable whether it's the second or the first brain. The gut is the only part of the body that can function independent of the brain, because it has, of course, its own ecology, its own metabolic system. It can perpetuate without the brain being involved. Every other organ in your body requires the brain to signal it to function. And so then we started looking at influences of the brain from the gut itself. And as it turns out, the bacteria within the gut have a direct connection to the brain, and it's a two-way system. And that's through the enteric nervous system. So the enteric nervous system basically covers the entire digestive tract from the mouth all the way down to your bottom. And there's more nerve endings in the enteric nervous system than in your spinal cord itself. So it's a very dense neurological system. That enteric nervous system, which the bacteria in your gut have direct access to, connects to something called the vagus nerve, which goes right to the brain. So imagine this, that bacteria within your gut can actually produce chemicals like neurotransmitters, peptides, things that could influence your thought and the way you react to the world around you, and directly send it to your brain through the vagus nerve and the enteric nervous system. And your brain can then communicate directly with your gut as well to try to get help from the bacteria in many ways. For example, in hormones. Hormone signaling is a two-way mechanism. Our gut microbiome makes basically every hormone that our endocrine system can make. And our endocrine system, through our brain, can talk to our gut and say, hey, we need more of this hormone or that hormone, whether it's serotonin, dopamine, any of the stress hormones, even testosterone is being made in the gut, we now understand. So that gut-brain connection is something that we're really starting to understand. And we're really starting to understand that our bacteria will determine so much of how our brain works, even more than how our brain can influence what our bacteria is doing.
That's why the studies are very clear. You see the strong association of depression with your gut, anxiety with your gut, schizophrenia with the bacteria in your gut, bipolar disorder and the bacteria in your gut. All of these studies are coming, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. We now know Parkinson's begins in the gut, the bacteria in the gut. That's why it's so important to have a healthy microbiome, because the microbiome sends out much more messaging to the body than what the human genome sends to the body in terms of direction.
The gut microbiota is very important because there are 2 interfaces by which it works. And you know that when you are working at that interface, interesting things happen. They actually pre-process everything that you eat. So they pre-process, that lunch that you just had, that tyrosine that you just took, and all the other things that you've been taking. It's pre-processed right there. And then on the back end of it, they're actually adjacent to the intestinal wall, and therefore there is that interaction with the intestinal wall. We now know that the gut is the largest immune system in the body, essentially because it's the gut bacteria that teaches the body what is foreign and what is not foreign to itself.
Do you have more metabolites in your blood? From bacteria in your gut than your own metabolites that are human metabolites? and it affects everything that's going on.
We know that some properly bacteria inside the skin are able to produce short fatty acids that could be very, very useful to modulate the other bacteria for interfering with other bacteria, and also to feed the cellular immune system inside the dermis. So we have a several factors, and the system are very, very similar what we have seen in the intestine.
You have trillions of little pets living inside of you that you should also be considering that you need to be feeding them and feeding them properly, because they're helping you. They're helping keeping your immune system intact, helping maintain an anti-inflammatory state in your body. And they do this by taking the food that you eat, taking those non-nutritional components that you think about, and actually producing them, taking them, converting them, and producing other byproducts that are now becoming signaling molecules in our body. And these byproducts, for instance, the short-chain fatty acids, those interact with different receptors and transporters in our body that then can be anti-inflammatory and modulate throughout the entire body.
When your microbiota produce short-chain fatty acid, the short-chain fatty acid is really a key factor to communicate with mitochondria, with other cells and with the organ. And these short-chain fatty acids can affect mitochondria biogenesis. Can affect mitochondria bioenergetics. They use key factors like free radicals, short-chain fatty acids, NO, they use H2S, so they have many arms. So the question is, how can we provide energy with intact mitochondria, and who control mitochondria? We believe that microbiota control mitochondria. So they ask them to move, they ask them to provide energy at this place, they ask them to increase metabolism at this place, or they ask them to die. Where we can find microbiota? Not only at the level of the gut, we can find them in the lungs, we can find them in the liver, in the kidney, and in the skin, in the brain. So I think that all these microbiota play another role to control the harmony of the organ.
But that axis between mitochondria and microbiota is predicated in terms of efficacy by the availability of nutrients. So the bacteria require the nutrients to be extracted from the foods in order to make mitochondria become replicable, repairable, and functional. And equally, mitochondria release various metabolites as a result of their activity, which favors a smooth, calm, functioning microbiota. So we have two bacterial components. One is the microbiota, which exists as a wide range of different species, and we have the remnants of a bacteria that was subsumed by a cell millions of years ago, which exchange information. That dynamic dialogue is really a very new area of research, but what we can say is its dialogue becomes determined by the availability of substrate, and that substrate is our food. And arguably, what we can say is that the bacteria present in the soil communicate with the bacteria in our gut and the historical remnants of the bacteria that determine our viability as a human through a system of transfer of knowledge.
It's been established that our microbiota communicate with our mitochondria. But in order to create health, we have to give our microbes local, organic, and whole foods. And through these foods, our microbiota are able to pass on the appropriate messages to our cells so our genes can properly respond in a healthy and balanced way. So our food is quite literally communicating with our cells. And one of the more fascinating things scientists have recently discovered is the ability of our food to pass on some of its genetic information, which then influences our own genetic expression.
We can look at the body as an aggregation of endosymbionts, or bacteria that live inside our cells, and they are the mitochondria, and exosymbionts. These are bacteria that live outside of our cells, and majority of that is living in our gut, 78% in fact, and they're called our gut microbiota. So the mitochondria is actually a longer range sensor for the geography. They evolve over time to accommodate the temperature, the sunlight, the actual geographic environment by which you're growing up. However, the bacteria are more rapid sensors for your nutrient needs. Remember that the body is always concerned about its survival, and therefore it's always looking for its energy source. And the gut bacteria actually are the ones who are sensing what you're actually giving it, and therefore they modify themselves in order to be more adaptive to what kind of energy you're giving them. So in that sense, these two are long-term and short-term sensors for providing you with energy. Now, and it has been found that these two systems communicate by several means. We used to think that they communicated only via the nervous system, like the vagus nerve, and via the hormonal system, like cortisol or the stress hormone, or via the immune system by production of inflammatory signals like the cytokines. We also now know that they communicate directly by structures like the microRNA, which bud off from the bacteria.
In 2004, scientists were just stunned to find out that there were only approximately 23,000 protein coding genes in the human genome. You have 3 billion base pairs. 98% or more of the genome was identified to be junk because it didn't code for protein. But the RNAs are also transcribed, so the rest of the genome is transcribed, and those are primarily RNAs. And so a certain category of those microRNAs have been identified to orchestrate and supervene upon, epigenetically, most of the protein coding genes in the human genome. So the complexity of life actually is largely dependent on the amount of RNAs that are transcribed and their activities, and microRNAs are a subset of RNAs that are able to basically control gene expression. With the discovery of RNA-based crosstalk, is that epithelial cells, that line, say, the intestines, can communicate through these little molecular messengers, which are the microRNAs, to bacteria. Bacteria can communicate to the epithelial tissue. So there is now a sense that actually we are one body, the microbiome, mainly the bacteria within it, have been described as a meta-organism, but we as a whole are a holobiont. We are this singular entity, actually.
I love the view of a human being as a holobiome. A holobiome is a superorganism. We're really a walking, talking ecology, right? We're like a walking, talking rainforest. And there's a massive amount of structure to the ecology. Different parts of the body, different ecologies within the body have to communicate to one another, and we require all of their help in order to be human.
50 years ago, there was some understanding that if you eat some yogurt, then you had some bacteria in your gut and it was better. And after you had antibiotics, maybe you should do that. And now the gut microbiota is arguably, in that immune system interface, is arguably the hottest area of scientific research within medicine.
So let's say we have this huge population of bacteria in the gut that are not healthy. Certain things are happening. When they are not healthy, they're in a state of dysbiosis. They're damaging the lining of the intestinal membrane, and certain elements are leaking into the bloodstream. Once that happens, our immune system starts to activate, and we create a chronic inflammatory state. It affects our entire host immune response.
So the gut and its interrelationship with its microbiome is not just kind of an interesting secondary topic. It is a fundamental arsenal of defense at first line that helps to protect us from everyday stuff out there that in the absence of it, we would not make it a day.
We've known that the microbes line the gut. lining, and that's where most of your immune tissue is. So 80% of your immune tissue is in your gut. It's in the intestinal lining. We also know that that immune tissue is covered by trillions and trillions of bacteria. So how is it that these microbes can talk to our immune system on a regular basis without enacting an immune response, if you will? And then the discovery of toll-like receptors helped explain that. So toll-like receptors are these really interesting receptors that are expressed on many of our cells, including, of course, our immune cells, that are expressed in response to the presence of certain types of bacteria. And the bacteria allow the toll-like receptors to upregulate, which will recognize patterns on those microbes themselves. So they will recognize patterns on both pathogenic organisms, so that our immune system knows, oh, this toll-like receptor is activated, that means it's a bad bacteria, or these toll-like receptors are activated, which means it's a fine, friendly bacteria. So in this case, we don't start eliciting an immune response. In this case, we do elicit an immune response. So it's a really interesting communication tool between our commensal bacteria and the rest of our immune system. And what we start to find is that when we have low levels of expression of certain types of toll-like receptors, we become overactive in our immune system and start to attack everything.
Hay fever, environmental allergies, that really emerged in the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century. So you have to go back and say, what's causing these allergies? Why all of a sudden in the modern world is allergy a new normal?
I was talking to my daughter, who's 6, who goes to a public school, and she was saying to me, Mama, I really want to sit with Emma and Laura at lunch, but you keep sending me apples with nut butter, and I can't even sit with them because they're at the nut-free table. And I just reflected to myself that when I was growing up, there wasn't a nut-free table, right? So this is one generation that we have become inured, really, because I don't see parents looking around asking each other, what's going on that you can't even get peanuts on an airplane anymore? You know, what's happening that there are special designated, eating areas in our, children's lunchrooms, right? So there is this sort of lobster pot kind of phenomenon, the slow boil that we are all sort of steeping in, where it's actually easy to, stay zoomed in, right? Stay focused on your day-to-day responsibilities and just assume someone else is making these big observations about what's been happening even over the past, 100 years.
So the adaptive immune system is where we're often seeing food sensitivities arise in IgG antibodies. IgG antibodies are also associated with severe allergies, which are more, a different antibody, but they're also activated, and autoimmunity, which is also on the rise. So we have to look at the connections between the microbiome, the immune system, and the environment, and how this confluence of factors comes together in an individual and makes them more sensitive, more reactive, and what is it we can do to shift that terrain?
If the food is contaminated to begin with toxic chemicals, and the best example is aflatoxin in peanuts, but the glyphosates now are everywhere, right? So these chemicals going to the proteins of the food and bind covalently to them. So the oral tolerance that we had 50 years ago, 100 years ago, is completely different. Our body cannot tolerate glyphosates. Our body cannot tolerate mercury. Our body cannot tolerate aluminum. And so therefore, the immune system is not functioning against the toxic chemicals. Oral tolerance breaks down, and now our cells are going to attack the chemicals plus proteins of the food. The results of that will be antibody production, cytokine production, and food immune reactivity and autoimmunity.
Things like gluten sensitivity, which are very popular now, and many people find that they're sensitive to it. There's some people that have different reactions with gluten. For example, there are Europeans that have no reaction to gluten in Europe, and they come to the US and they have to gluten-free or they get sick during the whole trip. And there's Americans that can't touch gluten here, and then they go to Europe and they have no reactions. So we know that it's not just the gluten protein, but there's other things that impact gluten. So the pesticides we use can change the protein itself. So pesticides can bind to gluten and change the structural protein, and that becomes a different target site for the immune system. So gluten's not the same everywhere. Now there are some people that are extremely sensitive to gluten, and it doesn't matter whatever type of gluten they get to, they get the reaction. And then there's people who have gluten sensitivity, and then they improve their immune function, and then they can somewhat tolerate it. Now, these all go back to tolerance. So when we look at tolerance, there's different parts of tolerance. One part of tolerance is how you break down your food. So it's really critical to have healthy immune tolerance by digesting your food proteins. So if you're lacking in enzymes and you can't break down your proteins, then you can have greater immune reactions. So protein structure gets broken down to amino acids. Anti-immune systems can only react to a protein. They can't react to broken down amino acids. So if you can't break down your protein to amino acids, then you're very prone to having immune reactions. People that have digestive enzyme issues, where they can't digest protein or carbohydrates or starches, they end up having more tolerance problems. And then on the gut barrier, there are these cells called dendritic cells, and these dendritics are a sample of food proteins. And if you're vitamin A deficient, they tend to be more exaggerated. If you have lots of chemical exposure to your gut, they tend to be exaggerated in their immune response. And then you have things like intestinal permeability, the gut everyone knows about. And then you have these things called regulatory T cells, which decide whether you have inflammatory response or not have inflammatory response. Things like opioids from exercise, opioids from thoughts, emotions, they impact regulatory T cells. Vitamin D, antioxidants like glutathione, those all impact this tolerance systems. So at the end of the day, I think the next real battle is how do we improve our tolerance? Because what we're really facing when we see all these neuroinflammatory diseases and things like autism skyrocket and dementia, that these are all inflammatory. And the reason they've all become inflammatory is because as a population, we've lost our tolerance. So clinical strategies to eat more diversified plant foods or take probiotics or all these various things that we do in a nutritional functional medicine model, in reality are just changing tolerance. So I think we just have to kind of change your mindset and look at tolerance, and then look at biomarkers like regulatory T cell function and monitor a person's ability to either tolerate the world or not tolerate the world.
We're losing diversity and balance of our microbiota due to the toxins and diminishing relationship with local foods and soils. When the crosstalk between our microbiota and our cells shifts to more of an inflammatory state, we lose our ability to tolerate foods, chemicals, and the world around us. This is one of the big reasons it becomes so critical to eat a diverse array of organic, whole plant foods from our native environment. One of the things we heard over and over again from the elders around the world was that they were intimately in touch with their local environment and were exposed to a variety of pathogens that challenged their immune systems. Could it be that a lack of exposure to common pathogens actually creates poor immune function?
We didn't exist and thrive as a human in isolation. We thrived as a human because we were able to pick up organisms from our environment and create the superorganism.
I believe from evolutionary point of view is to educate the immune system. To educate the immune system in the gut in order to learn how to live in harmony. We have to get sick in order to have fit immune system. Because it's exactly like, when you get sick, your immune system is going to practice more and more and more, producing more antibodies, more memory lymphocytes. So next time when you get, again, cold, those memory lymphocytes immediately go into action and produce lots of antibodies and protect us against many infections in the future.
Y había, pues para hacer montaña cerrada, imagínense todo lo que debía haber existido. Topamos con la malaria. Mi papá, cuando teníamos malaria, yo ya soy una de las últimas de los 13. Yo soy la antepenúltima. Y cuando teníamos paludismo, que era malaria, nos daban solo medicina del monte, hojas, raíces, y nos daban una planta que se llamaba quinina, o se llama quinina. hacían una mezcla ahí, nos daban como unas bolitas, como unos confititos, nos tomábamos y con eso sacaban la fiebre y nos curábamos.
You know, these so-called diseases, are they unnatural states, or are they a natural part of our development and a development of our immune system, or maybe more broadly, our ability to adapt to the environment that's around us? If you were born in my era and you know, anywhere around there, it was very normal for kids to get measles, very normal for kids to get chicken pox. And what do you think the consequence of that is? Their immune system naturally is exposed to these microbial agents that manifest certain symptoms for a self-limited period of time, and now your body is naturally immune to these things on an ongoing basis. But it's also, it's like going to the gym and working out and building the muscle of the immune system to have exposure to this, to live. Any person that's a scientist that understands anything around these areas say, if you lived in a perfectly sterile environment all the time and never had exposure to any of these things, you are somebody who's at risk then to go out into the world because your immune system's got no reference point. It's never been built for it.
Piccole, le solite malattie dei bambini, morbillo, varicella, questo è sempre perché andavi a scuola, c'era uno e allora tutti malati.
I had the same earache my entire life because it was interfered with. My kids, anytime they got a little infection, it was supported, allowed to run its course, and I didn't revisit it.
So now we're constantly inoculating against these childhood illnesses, and we're, again, reducing the fever, and we're stopping the cough. And that drives, that drives the illness into like a lesional level. And that's where, again, in naturopathic medicine, chronic disease happens. It's like, what is the solution to the fever? Well, the fever is the solution. The fever is what's driving, up the body temperature to kill the pathogen or put things back into balance.
It's interesting. Children, when they mount an immune response, they almost universally get some type of fever. Even with colds, they get a really potent immune response, and they feel pukey. I mean, they're not happy. They're not feeling good. But it's interesting as we get older, and particularly we enter the work environment, we take things that kind of suppress that response. So we use some antihistamines, we use some anti-inflammatories that kind of mitigate some of the immune response. And there may be some downsides to that. Trying to stymie or avoid all infectious agents is ultimately going to play a really negative role. It tunes the immune response. And if we don't tune the immune response to pathogenic organisms, what seems to happen is some sort of a drifting, and then we start tuning the immune response to food substances. And that's really a problem because you have to eat. And if you become reactive to virtually everything in your diet, the multiple chemical sensitivity kind of scenario, that becomes really challenging to unpack.
Vedduze si vázame, a majtani polikriomenu. Είχαμε...
Το πίτερο τι το κάναμε,
δεν ξέρω.
Ευρύτια που
άμα είπα θα είναι πνευμονία, λίγα ζεσταίναν τα πίτερ. Αυτά δεν τα φτάσα εγώ. Βεντούζες που βάζαμε ενόπνευμα μέσα σε ένα ή το πρώτο ούζο που έβγαινε και αυτό έπαιρε φωτιά. Και είχαμε ένα πυρούνι και τυλίαμε ένα βαβάκι και το τυλίαμε μια κλωστή και το βουτούσαμε και το ναύαμε και είχαμε αυτά ήταν κάτι ειδικά. Το κάναμε έτσι και το βάλαμε του ανθρώπου, τις βεντούζες. Ναι, ξεκρύωνε ο άνθρωπος. Αφού πολλές φορές μαύριζαν εκεί, γέμιζαν και εκείνο εκεί το κρέας εκεί τα μέσα.
Getting sick is a very important process, not only to allow your body to exercise its capability to protect the host, the release of all the cytokines that are important to sequester the infection or the inflammation, the release of all the chemical signatures to heal that tissue, to quarantine the bacteria or the virus or whatever it is that's making us sick. It's all practice, and the immune system does a good job when it has enough practice. If it's just sitting there naive and then it's exposed to something, it really kind of goes out of whack and doesn't know what to do.
If we don't strain our immune system by working it out, exercising it, and how do you do that? Getting sick.
How do you do that? Allowing bacteria and viruses and fungi to battle with your immune system. So at the end of the day, if we're not allowing our immune system just to grow, to mature from birth, we're going to grow up physically handicapped in the sense that our immune system will not be able to function how it should be.
When you look at a standard birth done in a hospital, and you look at the fact that that baby is coming out of a vaginal canal and it's getting all of the beneficial bacteria that it needs to fight off flu, to fight off cancer, to fight off heart disease, all that stuff is right around mom's vaginal canal. So when the head of that baby comes through that canal, it's getting all that beneficial bacteria.
It's perhaps counterintuitive, but if we look at who is susceptible to things like the influenza virus, and by susceptible being that it could lead into a fatal or potentially a near fatal circumstance, it tends to be the elderly and it tends to be the very, very young. And in between that, we see that if folks are well-fed, well-rested, reasonably, able to deal with the stress load that they're placed under from their day-to-day, life environment, they tend to handle most colds, flus, diseases pretty effectively. It's never fun, but it's not a fatal occurrence, whereas in these immune-compromised boundaries of society, these are the folks that can really be impacted.
Did you ever get any kind of like dengue or anything like that? Is that common?
Dengue, it is common during the rainy season. But dengue it's a fever, man. I know it sounds huge, but unless you are very weak,
sure,
or are pregnant,
right?
It doesn't really. It messed up a couple of days of your life. You get the fever and the headaches, but it won't kill you.
It's not a big thing.
No, it's not a big. You don't want to have it.
One of the things that really has confused scientists and medical doctors is the presence of microbes and viruses that we think of as being pathogenic and harmful. And if they're there, should we kill it? Should we go after it? A great example is the systematic attack of H. pylori. Right, Helicobacter pylori is an important bacteria that's actually quite commensal to your stomach and your upper GI tract. However, some H. pylori can cause ulcers. And so now what they've done over the last 25, 30 years is anytime they see H. pylori on a test that it's there, it's positive, they hit it with antibiotics. Now, further studies have shown that the systematic eradication of H. pylori actually increases the risk for gastroesophageal cancer. So H. pylori was playing a really important role in maintaining some form of homeostasis within the body. So this systematic attack of microorganisms that we look at as bad actually causes more disruption down the road, because again, we have to think of ourselves as an ecology. They all play a role. Clostridia is thought to be really bad, right? Well, no, actually high levels of Clostridia is associated with lower incidence of allergies, asthma, psoriasis, atopic dermatitis, and so on. So Clostridia play a really important role in training the immune system, how to function. And so the thing that we have to realize is we don't know what we don't know. There's so much to know. There's so many things we don't know that we don't even know the information that we're missing. And the ecology of our body is extremely complicated. And anytime we start to do these precision attacks on microbes, we tend to create more problem than solution.
We have a tendency to see things like E. coli or even Candida and all these things being bad. And necessarily, they may not necessarily be bad. That when we're looking at the symbiotic relationship, that's really the key factor. So whether they become pathogenic or not really depends on a bunch of other variables. And one of the other variables is what other types of bacteria you have in your gut at any given time and how they all communicate and work together.
So one of the elements of the microbiome that is sometimes overlooked is the virome, which is the total set of viruses that are also continually present as part of our meta-organism. And they include things like bacteriophages, which will actually, in some ways, oversee the bacterial populations. And they do have the ability to consume or kill some of the bacteria. So there is this turnover that's occurring. A good portion over the course of a day of the bacteria are being digested by these viral bacteriophages. But the virome is actually an information network as well. Because on some level, viruses are just pieces of genetic information in search of chromosomes, and that they are a mechanism of horizontal gene transfer and information transfer. And so what's happening is we're starting to understand that even if you look at the protein coding genes in the human genome, the approximately 18,000, because the number has kept going down, is that about 7% of those are retroviral in origin. The most horrific virus you can think of today is HIV, right? Well, that category of virus has been responsible for producing a good portion of what is considered still by most scientists to be the most important part of our genome. And things like the placenta only exist because of these retroviruses. And even the neuroplasticity in our brain and the encephalization event of 2 million years ago that caused an explosion in the size of our brain are probably caused by these endogenized retroviruses becoming indispensable parts of why we have become the remarkable and in some way twisted species that we are today.
As long as our immune system learn to live in harmony with these aerobe, anaerobe, yeast, name it, we cannot call those bad bacteria. Unfortunately, we call them bad bacteria that when we do something to our gut, that the number of E. coli increases by 10 times and yeast probably decreases. And so this whole changing the ecology of the gut is going to make the environment more inflammatory and causing leaky gut and all other associated disorders.
There are also chemicals that are produced by the bacteria or fungi or viruses themselves that affect us. And one example or compounds would be short-chain fatty acids like butyrate. So we know that some of the beneficial gut bacteria in our gut produce butyrate, and butyrate is a short-chain fatty acid that we can use for energy, but it's also powerful anti-inflammatory, and it has a immunoregulatory effect. So they've done studies where they found that people with autoimmune disease often have lower levels of butyrate, which makes sense, and that means that our gut bacteria might actually impact our susceptibility to autoimmune disease.
Butyrate has been shown not only with antibiotics but other areas to be able to preserve that barrier of the intestine. And so that's really powerful because if bacteria or the bacterial byproducts leak across the intestine and become systemic, then that leads to systemic inflammation and altered immunity and then ultimately organ dysfunction.
It's interesting when we think about, okay, I'm going to get sick. When I get sick, what should I do? Do I do the standard deal of grabbing an antihistamine and something like Sudafed? Or can I use some more natural products? And then there's a whole host of other therapies. Like when somebody gets a fever, it is very uncomfortable. But that fever process is increasing our body temperature because it creates a less optimum environment for bacteria or virus to replicate, and it's increasing our metabolic rate so that our immune system, basically on the chemistry level, it can do more stuff because there's more heat, there's more energy. And so that fever is valuable. And instead of suppressing the fever response, for example, with say like an anti-inflammatory, some of this old wisdom of giving people cool baths, and what that's doing is it's wicking excess heat out of the body, but it's not stopping the process. And then we'll cool them off a little bit, and then they will start heating up, and then we need to cool them off. The challenge with that is it's maintenance and it's work. It's not just dropping a pill in and kind of set it and forget it, but there's some great research and also just kind of broader anecdote that suggests that tackling things in that way allows for a more broad immune response. And something that folks don't really appreciate oftentimes, when you are mounting an immune response against a cold or like a bacteria or a viral infection, when the immune response upregulates, it's also looking for cancer. It's looking for everything. It's looking for gut pathogens. So in the process of effectively fighting a cold or flu, we are also decreasing our likelihood of developing cancers. So we want that immune tuning, and I think that there's some really interesting opportunities with some natural products and even with kind of old kind of naturopathy type therapeutics like hydrotherapy to increase or decrease body temperature to mitigate the negative effects of, say, like a fever.
Cuando un carajillo, un niño se enfermaba, le untaban algunas cosas, manteca de cerdo, para refrescarle la fiebre o calentura. Como decir ahora, untarle cepol o cofal.
Así hay otra planta hombre grande que debilita para allá, se llama hombre grande, es amargo, como eso también sirve para la fiebre y todo eso.
I suspect that by living in the same region, and specifically by a generation or a family or a tribe or a culture, living in the same region from generation to generation, those individuals may actually develop a unique relationship with the environmental microbiome that surrounds them, meaning the bacteria in the soil and the bacteria on the plants and the ability to be able to tolerate, from like a gut standpoint, the consumption of certain plants in their environment. And I feel that by developing a very solid relationship with the biome of the environment that you're in, you actually develop the ability to be able to withstand a lot of the foods in that biome that might otherwise be problematic foods for people who just like move to that area and start to eat all those foods.
It's been shown that geography has a role in what our gut microbiota composition will be. There's been a number of studies that have looked at individuals from different parts of the world and done comparisons on their gut microbiota blend and the fermentation byproducts. And one of the big things is that locally, if your food is grown, it's fresh, and you're taking in, the food is grown in the soil. The soil is local. It has the local nutrients that are normalized for that climate. And so that should be beneficial to the host because everything kind of goes together, gets involved with the DNA, and all of that's there.
食べ物はね、沖縄のね、野菜とかもので作ったもの、そば、ゴーヤーチャンプルとか、この島ので作ったものが大好き。
All kinds of literature is now coming out that the more we can protect a diverse microbiome, the healthier our children are. So children who are born vaginally, children who breastfeed, children who are able to experience microbes in their environment from the soil, a natural exposure to a diverse array of microbes is really important for health.
Certo che è importante, perché non prendi malattie in quel periodo, il bambino è immunizzato perché e poi è più giusto così. E in quei tempi poi non c'erano granché di comprare pappe, dovevi mettere per forza il latte, era normale.
En ese tiempo el único medicamento era la teta. El niño mamantaba la leche y con eso se curaba. Ahí no había nada, no entraba enfermedad.
Me автомоно, me да никаких τίποτα. Ούτε κρέμες είχε, ούτε τίποτα. Ηλιώνανε την πατάτα, άμα ήπιανε λίγο το παιδί. Και την κάνανε έτσι να του δώσουν. Δεν είχε ούτε κρέμες είναι, ούτε τίποτα.
Και το κουτσί.
Το μασούσανε και το βγάλανε από το στόμα τους, αφού πέραν την ύλη οι μανάδες, οι κρυές, και το έφαγε και το έβαλε στο μωρό το στόμα. Με τα σάγια.
Habían baños, estaba medio refrigerito, cocinábamos de naranja agrio y lo llamamos tibio y ya está. Esas eran las curas.
For these kids to be healthy and happy, I'm talking to families about how are they eating, which is a way that we connect with the natural world by literally ingesting it and incorporating it into our bodies. How are we interacting with nature? How often do they get outside? Can they take their homework or a book outside? And in the process, they're taking away a microbiome from the earth. They're building their immune systems.
Molti bambini scalzi, senza scarpe, perché non c'erano soldi. Niente. Andavi avanti così.
Nosotros no, porque mi papá decía que si usted camina en el suelo, usted cría defensas. Porque siempre nos decía eso, no nos daba oportunidad de los zapatos. Los zapatos se usaban porque si había una fiesta, pero nosotros andábamos porque ahí criábamos defensas. Un chiquito, pequeñito, lo llevamos al mar, a bañarse al mar, porque así no sufría de resfríos. Y por el yodo del mar y qué sé yo, todo ese cuento. Y así nosotros no tuvimos esos prejuicios de que las bacterias, ahora sí tenemos exceso de bacterias, porque ahora hay un montón de contaminación. Pero en aquella época no vivíamos eso.
It was really cool to see that the farming or homesteading style of living was still very much alive in Costa Rica. They had such a profound interaction with their environment, from interacting with the animals to walking barefoot to oftentimes just going shirtless. This type of living encourages and necessitates an interaction with your local environment, your local biomes, your soil microbiomes that we don't get in modern city living. And they understood this. They understood that being in touch with their environment was a very healthy thing. It also gives you a perspective on the pace of life and the rhythm of life, because the animals are very much guided by a rhythm. So getting up early in the morning and flowing with the day based on the way that the animals are raised, the way the garden is raised, the way the sun is setting and the seasons flow, really allowed them to go with the flow of life in a way that we don't get when we're living in a city.
I like to always look back at evolution and see, what did our ancestors do to support their microbiome that led us to this phase where we are right now, where we're the top of the food chain, top of the evolutionary ladder. So just going back to the basics, playing in the dirt, eating a diverse diet, getting rid of all these chemicals we know that harm us, seems to make the most sense right now.
So when you change your diet and change your microbiome, that changes all your gene expressions. If you get constantly exposed to chemicals, that changes your gene expression or how your genes activate and turn on and turn off. At the end of the day, they were always doing what we call gene expression. We're just using these terms more often, but it's just normal physiology.
All of that ties together with the functional integrity of mitochondria, of which lifestyle, diet, environment play principal roles. So it's not just your genes alone, it's how they're influenced by the living process that gives rise to the integrity of your mitochondrial function.
So mitochondria are the powerhouses of our cell. They're in constant communication with our genes and constantly influenced by the things outside of our genes and our mitochondria to bring them to function, to bring them to life, and determine our state of health at any given moment in time.
The recent study shows that with the communication of the mitochondria and microbiota by various types of signaling molecules, that it's actually the microbiota that control how much ATP production is going to be put out by the mitochondria. And it's also the microbiota that determine how much ROS production or reactive oxygen species production is going to be. But the communication is not one way. The mitochondria can also produce signaling molecules saying to the gut microbiota, hey, this is all we've got, because it determines how much food you're going to eat, right? So that's the immediate energy source, is that you have to get food from the environment. And therefore, the gut microbiota has to be able to signal the mitochondria like, hey, food incoming, this is how much is coming. And therefore, the mitochondria says, okay, we can process that. But if it's too much, it says, okay, I am producing this much rusting or ROS out here. Here is the ROS, and sense it. And the gut bacteria says, oh, okay, we are going to decrease our efficiency of absorbing energy from this food. So you could see how these two bacterial sets are actually communicating without our knowledge.
And so when we talk about our genetics, we have to appreciate that there's a crosstalk happening between our DNA and our mitochondrial function. And that crosstalk is directly tied to how the cell methylates, how certain methyl groups and methyl reactions are going back and forth, how they're coming in and out of the mitochondria at a specific rate. And these things are really intricate when we get into mitochondrial metabolism and mitochondrial defense mechanisms.
DNA is transcribed to RNA and then is translated to protein. That's the classic pathway. What happens is that the DNA, when it gets transcribed to RNA, there is a post-transcriptional modification that they call, or a change in the RNA itself. And that's where microRNA is produced. Now, we've just seen in the studies recently that these microRNA are actually messenger molecules. And what they do is they bud off from the cell membrane and they're encased as vesicles, and then they latch on to the cell membrane of the cell that they're communicating to. And we find that there are two sources of DNA in a cell, right? In a eukaryotic cell or in a human cell, there are two sources of DNA. One will be from the nucleus itself, which is DNA, and the other is mitochondrial DNA. So both of these can be controlled by epigenetic mechanisms, or mechanisms by which you can alter the gene expression without actually altering the DNA itself. And this is how, you know, we can get mitochondria, for example, to increase their production of reactive oxygen species, or increase their production of ATP for energy generation. So we can see there that both of these DNA systems have epigenetic mechanisms that can respond to these microRNAs that are in there.
And it turns out that these microRNAs actually exist in like foods we consume. Like when I eat grapefruit or rice, they contain these little nanoparticles. They're like little delivery molecules for these, you know, RNAs that regulate our genome. We eat the rice, they go into our blood, and they alter our gene expression. And so basically, we're finding that over the course of evolution, we have literally outsourced gene regulation to the plants in our environment. And also there's other, you know, passengers on this journey with us. Bacteria produce microRNAs, for example, and they help to orchestrate the complexity of our being. So what it means ultimately is that there is interspecies communication occurring through the mechanism of microRNAs, such that the biosphere is actually all one on some basic molecular level. For quite some time, you know, one of the primary dogmas of molecular biology is that, you know, there's a unidirectional flow of information. You know, it's the protein coding genes, they go outward, they code for proteins, and then there's no information that comes from the environment into the genome. But because of retroviruses, you know, which were discovered in the 70s, we know that, in fact, the opposite is true, and that these viruses are able to insert genetic matter backwards so they can get into the genome permanently. It can stay there for millions of years. But what we're realizing really is that if you look at the glacial pace of change that occurs within the protein coding genes of the human genome, and you look at what viruses are able to do in real time, what's happened is we have to now acknowledge that our moment-to-moment exposures in the environment to viruses, for example, or it could be toxicants, will affect our genome in an inheritable way, so that it puts a profound responsibility on our choices right now, but it also shows us the profound power we have to affect all future generations through decisions we're making now, both positively and potentially not positively. MicroRNAs are one of the ways in which that has happened. It's collapsed the time scale from billions of years to millions of years to change, you know, the infrastructure of our species to literally microseconds. So I could literally consume a plant with microRNAs that will impart information to my genome, or the sperm in, you know, my testicles, which would forever change the phenotype of my offspring and their offspring. So it is completely altered the embedded and omnipresent fatalism that has been secretly, like a Trojan horse, been infecting literally millions of people in their religious level faith that we are these biomachines that are just, carcass-like, fundamentally defective, gene-driven, with really no soul in them, to now understand that we are creating our destiny every moment on a biological level, based on really simple lifestyle choices. What food do I eat? What exercise do I not do or do? What am I thinking and feeling? This is the new biology, and this is some of the most spiritual and empowering, information I think that's available to us today.
Thank you for watching episode 2 of the Human Longevity Project. I know it was a lot to take in, but what you just heard was truly mind-blowing. The quadrillions of microbes that live in and on our body are in two-way communication with both our mitochondria and with our DNA. Not only that, we have the genetic information from foods talking to our cells as well. So we actually have food and microbes directly communicating with human cells to determine genetic expression. Pretty crazy, right? I know that was a ton of information, and I hope it wasn't too overwhelming. Believe it or not, what you just watched was a small fraction of the powerful information you'll find in the full-length interviews. That's why it was important for us to make sure you could access all of their interviews by purchasing this series and becoming a Human Longevity Project ambassador. When you do, you not only gain lifetime access to all 9 episodes, you also gain access to over 94 full-length expert interviews, 22 full-length interviews from the elders, MP3s, interview transcripts, and a detailed action plan, and other great bonuses. More importantly, you'll be a part of our growing community with the mission to help 1 million children and reduce the number of birth-related deaths worldwide. A portion of our proceeds will go to nonprofit organizations working to save the lives of mothers and newborns in developing countries. Every day, thousands of newborns and mothers die due to birthing complications and lack of care in mostly low-resource settings. With your help, we can dramatically reduce the tragic and avoidable suffering. You can learn more by clicking the link below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.